The wind howled across the Arizona desert like the wail of lost souls, driving snow horizontal against the adobe walls of the Martinez ranch house. Elena pressed her face to the frosted window, watching the white curtain of the blizzard swallow her world whole. 3 years she had weathered storms alone in this house, but none quite like this one. "Maldita tormenta," she whispered, pulling her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. The fire in the hearth crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, where her husband Miguel's rifle still hung, cleaned, loaded, and ready. She had learned to be ready for anything out here, where civilization was a 2-day ride to the nearest town. At 30, Elena Martinez had hands that knew both the softness of kneading dough and the hardness of working leather. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver from worry and grief, fell in waves past her shoulders. Miguel used to say her eyes held the warmth of desert summers and the fire of desert sunsets. Now those same eyes had grown cautious, alert to every sound that didn't belong to the rhythm of her solitary life. The cattle had been moved to the winter shelter 2 days ago, when the sky turned that peculiar shade of grey that promised serious weather. Her horses were safe in the barn, and she had enough supplies to last weeks if necessary. Elena had learned the hard way that preparation meant survival in this unforgiving land. A sharp crack echoed across the yard, not the sound of breaking wood, but something else. Elena froze, listening. The wind played tricks sometimes, carrying sounds from miles away or creating phantom noises in the storm. But there it was again, and this time she was certain. Someone was breaking the ice on her water trough. Her hand moved instinctively to Miguel's Colt 45 on the table beside her. In 3 years alone, she had faced down claim jumpers, desperate drifters, and once a half-starved mountain lion. But something about this felt different. The sounds were deliberate, careful, not the clumsy fumbling of thieves or the frantic desperation of wild animals. Elena moved through her house like a ghost, checking each window. The storm made it impossible to see more than 20 feet in any direction, but she caught glimpses of movement near the barn, dark shapes moving with purpose despite their obvious exhaustion. Then she saw him. Even through the driving snow, even bent against the brutal wind, there was something about the way he moved that made her breath catch. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than Miguel had been, with long black hair whipping in the wind. When he turned toward the house, Elena saw the sharp planes of his face, the determined set of his jaw, and something else, a nobility in his bearing that spoke of leadership, of a man accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. He was Apache. Elena knew it with the certainty born of living on the frontier. She had seen Apache warriors before, but never like this. Never one who moved with such quiet authority while clearly wounded. She could see the dark stain spreading across his buckskin shirt, the way he favored his left side. Behind him, 6 other figures emerged from the storm like spirits materializing from the white void. All Apache, all young men, all bearing the marks of recent violence. One was being supported by 2 others, barely conscious. Another had his arm bound against his chest in a makeshift sling. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Apache warriors at her ranch could mean her death or theirs if the cavalry was pursuing them. But as she watched the lead warrior approach her door, she saw something that gave her pause. He moved slowly, deliberately, his hands visible and empty. This was not the approach of a raiding party. When the knock came, soft, almost respectful, Elena stood frozen for a long moment. Through the heavy wooden door she heard a voice speak in accented but clear English. "Senora, we know you are inside. We mean you no harm. We ask only for shelter from the storm. My men are wounded, and the cold will kill them if we do not find warmth soon." The voice was deep, resonant, touched with a weariness that spoke of hard miles and harder choices. Elena found herself moving toward the door before her mind fully processed the decision. "How do I know you speak the truth?" she called back, her own voice steadier than she felt. "You do not," came the honest reply. "But we are 7, and you are 1. If we meant harm, we would not ask permission." Elena's hand hovered over the door latch. Every instinct screamed danger, but something else, something deeper, whispered of desperate men seeking mercy in a merciless storm. She thought of Miguel, of how he had always said that honor was measured not in what a person took, but in what they gave when they had little to give. "Step back from the door," she commanded, lifting the heavy wooden bar. When she opened it, the full fury of the blizzard struck her like a physical blow, but through the swirling snow she saw him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 27 or 28, with strong angular features and eyes the color of dark amber. Blood had dried on his temple, and exhaustion lined his face, but he stood straight, meeting her gaze with unflinching directness. "I am Aiyana," he said simply. "These are my warriors. We have been riding for 4 days ahead of the cavalry. The storm caught us in the open, and my wounded cannot go farther." Elena studied the group huddled behind him. Despite their obvious desperation, they maintained their dignity, waiting for their leader's word before moving. She recognized the discipline of seasoned fighters, but also something else, the hollow-eyed look of men who had lost much and expected to lose more. "The cavalry," she said carefully. "How close are they?" "The storm has hidden our tracks," Aiyana replied. "They will not ride in this weather, but when it clears—" He did not need to finish. Helena understood the mathematics of survival, as well as any frontier woman. When the storm passed, the hunt would resume, and anyone found harboring fugitive Apache would share their fate. She looked past Aiyana to his men, saw the one who could barely stand, saw the way they all shivered despite their stoic expressions. In that moment, Elena Martinez made a choice that would change the trajectory of her carefully ordered life. "Bring your wounded to the house," she said, stepping aside. "So your horses can shelter in the barn, but understand this. If you bring danger to my home, I will not hesitate to defend it." Aiyana's eyes met hers, and for a moment that stretched longer than the howling wind. Something passed between them, a recognition, an understanding that went beyond words. "We understand, Senora," he said quietly, "and we thank you." The warmth of Elena's home enveloped the Apache warriors like an embrace after the bitter cold. Steam rose from their snow-soaked clothing as they carefully carried their most injured companion to the thick rug before the fireplace. Elena watched Aiyana move through her living space with quiet respect, his amber eyes taking in every detail: the rifle on the wall, the photograph of her and Miguel on their wedding day, the well-maintained furniture that spoke of a woman who took pride in her home despite her solitude. "Place him here," Elena instructed, pulling heavy blankets from the cedar chest. The wounded warrior was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. A bullet had torn through his shoulder, and fever had taken hold during their desperate flight across the desert. "This is Nalnish," Aiyana said softly, kneeling beside his fallen warrior. "He took this wound defending our people during a raid on our winter camp. The soldiers came at dawn, when the women and children were still sleeping." Elena heard the weight of grief and responsibility in his voice. She had tended enough wounds during her 3 years alone to know what needed doing. "I'll need hot water, clean cloth and whiskey," she said, moving toward her kitchen. "The bullet needs to come out or the fever will kill him." As Elena worked to prepare her makeshift medical supplies, she was acutely aware of Aiyana's presence in her kitchen. He had followed her, leaving his men to tend to their own lesser wounds. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. The strong line of his jaw, the way his long black hair fell across his shoulders, the intelligent alertness in his eyes, despite his obvious exhaustion. "You have done this before," he observed, watching her efficient movements. "More times than I care to count," Elena replied, heating water over the stove. "This land has a way of teaching you medicine, whether you want to learn or not." "Your husband, he was a fighter." Elena paused in her work, surprised by the personal question. "Miguel was a rancher, a good man who believed in building something lasting in this hard place." She met Aiyana's gaze directly. "He died from a fever 3 winters ago. No bullet wound, no grand battle, just the sickness that comes with the changing seasons." Something shifted in Aiyana's expression, a softening that transformed his angular features. "I am sorry for your loss. To lose one's heart is a wound that never fully heals." The simple sincerity of his words struck Elena unexpectedly. In 3 years, no one had spoken of Miguel's death with such understanding. The few neighbors who visited her ranch spoke in platitudes or awkward silences, but this Apache warrior, this man who should be her enemy, offered genuine compassion. "Tell me about Nalnish," she said, carrying the hot water and supplies back to the wounded man. "It will help me treat him if I know more about his injury." Aiyana knelt beside her as she began cleaning the wound. His other warriors had arranged themselves around the room's perimeter, close enough to help if needed, but far enough to give their leader and the woman space to work. Elena noticed how they deferred to Aiyana without question, but also how he included them with glances and subtle gestures, the mark of a leader who inspired loyalty rather than demanded it. "We were camped in the Dragoon Mountains," Aiyana began, his voice steady despite the pain Elena knew he must be feeling from his own wounds. "Our band had been peaceful for 2 months, following the deer herds, bothering no one. But the new colonel at Fort Bowie, he sees all Apache as enemies to be destroyed, not people trying to survive. Elena worked carefully to extract the bullet, her hands steady despite the intimacy of kneeling so close to Aiyana. She could smell the wood smoke in his hair, the leather of his clothing, something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The attack came at first light, Aiyana continued. Nalnish was trying to help the children reach the horses when the bullet found him. He could have escaped, but he stayed to make sure the young ones were safe. A brave man, Elena murmured, finally working the bullet free. Nalnish stirred, but did not wake as she cleaned and bandaged the wound properly. All my warriors are brave, Aiyana said quietly, but bravery is not always enough against the blue coats and their guns. Elena looked up from her work to find Aiyana studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. In the firelight, his features seemed carved from bronze, and she found herself wondering what it would feel like to trace the line of his jaw with her fingertips. Your turn, she said, forcing herself to focus on practical matters. That head wound needs tending. Aiyana started to protest, but Elena was already moving toward him with a clean cloth and fresh water. You cannot lead if you collapse from blood loss, she said firmly. Sit. To her surprise, he obeyed, settling onto the wooden chair beside the fireplace. This close, Elena could see the exhaustion that lined his face, the burden of responsibility that sat heavy on his young shoulders. Gently, she began cleaning the gash on his temple where some projectile had grazed him during their escape. You are not what I expected, Aiyana said softly, his voice barely audible above the storm still raging outside. What did you expect? Elena asked, surprised by the question. Fear, hatred, the look I see in the eyes of most white settlers when they see Apache warriors. Elena's hand stilled for a moment. I have known fear, she admitted, but I have also known loneliness. And I have learned that survival sometimes requires trust, even when trust seems impossible. When their eyes met, Elena felt something electric pass between them, a recognition that went deeper than the circumstances that had brought them together. For a moment, the storm outside, the danger that would return with the dawn, even the presence of the other warriors faded away. There was only Aiyana's steady gaze, the warmth of his skin under her gentle touch, and the startling realization that she had not felt truly alive in 3 long years. Elena, Aiyana said softly, and the way he spoke her name, like a prayer, like something precious, sent warmth spreading through her chest. Yes, she whispered. When the storm ends, we will have to leave. The cavalry will come, and we cannot bring that danger to you. I know, she said, though the thought of them leaving filled her with an unexpected sense of loss. But until then, he reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched the backs of his fingers to her cheek. Until then, I am grateful for your kindness, your courage. Elena closed her eyes at his touch, leaning into it despite every rational thought screaming that this was madness. When she opened them again, she saw her own surprising desire reflected in his amber gaze. The spell was broken by a soft moan from Nalnish as he began to stir. Elena pulled back quickly, her cheeks flushed, but not before she saw Aiyana's slight smile, gentle, knowing, and full of promise. The storm raged for 2 more days, creating a strange intimacy within the walls of Elena's ranch house. By the second morning, Nalnish had awakened with clear eyes and color returning to his cheeks, though he remained weak. The other warriors had settled into a respectful routine, helping with chores, maintaining their weapons, and always keeping watch despite the blizzard that made visibility impossible beyond the yard. Elena found herself drawn to Aiyana in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. He moved through her home with natural grace, helping her tend the fire, assisting with meals, and engaging in conversations that revealed layers of intelligence and humor she hadn't expected. When he spoke of his people's history, his eyes held the wisdom of someone far older than his 27 years. When he smiled, a rare but radiant expression, Elena felt her carefully constructed defenses crumble a little more. On the second evening, as the warriors settled into sleep around the main room, Elena found herself unable to rest. The wind had died to a whisper, but snow still fell in heavy flakes outside her bedroom window. She pulled on Miguel's old wool coat and padded quietly to the kitchen, hoping not to wake anyone. Aiyana was there, standing by the window with a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the snow fall. He had changed from his torn buckskin shirt into one of Miguel's clean cotton shirts that Elena had offered. The white fabric made his skin seem to glow bronze in the lamplight, and Elena felt her breath catch at the sight of him. "Cannot sleep either?" he asked softly, not turning around. "Too quiet," Elena replied, moving to pour herself coffee from the pot he had kept warm. "Strange how silence can be louder than noise sometimes." Aiyana turned to face her, and Elena was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "In Apache tradition, we believe that storms bring messages from the spirits. Perhaps this one brought us here for a reason. Do you believe that?" Elena asked, settling into the chair across from him at her small kitchen table. "I believe that some things cannot be explained by logic alone," Aiyana said, sitting down opposite her. 3 days ago, if someone had told me I would be sitting in a white woman's kitchen, sharing coffee and conversation, I would have called them mad." Elena smiled despite herself. 3 days ago, if someone had told me I would be harboring 7 Apache warriors and enjoying their company, I would have checked them for fever. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the lamplight creating a warm circle around them while the rest of the house slept. Elena found herself studying Aiyana's hands as he held his coffee cup. Strong, calloused from years of handling weapons and horses, but surprisingly gentle when he had helped her tend Nalnish's wounds. "Tell me about your life before," she said quietly. "Before the cavalry, before the running. What was it like?" Aiyana's expression grew distant, touched with both longing and sadness. "We had a good camp in the mountains. My wife," he paused, glancing at Elena. "She died 2 years ago, in childbirth. Our son lived only 3 days. Elena felt her heart clench with sympathy. "I'm sorry, losing them both. The grief nearly killed me," Aiyana admitted. "For months, I cared nothing for life, took foolish risks in battle. My warriors feared I sought death to join my family. But my people needed leadership, and gradually I found purpose again in protecting those who survived. Is that why you never remarried? Apache men can take new wives, can't they?" Aiyana met her eyes directly. "Apache men can, but I could not imagine sharing my heart again. The pain of loss was too great." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "Until now, I had not met a woman who made me want to try." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge and a confession. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, her pulse quickening. She knew she should change the subject, should maintain the safe distance that circumstances demanded. Instead, she found herself leaning slightly forward. "Aiyana," she whispered, and his name on her lips felt like stepping off a cliff. "I know this is madness," he said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "I know that tomorrow, or the next day, I must leave this place and never return. I know that what I feel for you is impossible, dangerous for us both." Elena stared down at their joined hands, her pale fingers intertwined with his darker ones, the contrast beautiful and stark. "Then why does it feel like the most natural thing in the world?" "Perhaps because some connections transcend the boundaries others try to build," Aiyana said softly. "Perhaps because in a world full of hatred and violence, finding someone who sees your soul is a gift to be treasured, however briefly." Elena lifted her eyes to his face, seeing her own desire reflected in his amber gaze. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings about the danger, about the impossibility of any future together, about the scandal that would destroy her if anyone discovered what was happening in her heart. But the rational part of her mind had been silent for 3 years, buried under grief and loneliness, and she was tired of listening to it. "Miguel used to say that life was too short to waste on what-ifs and should-haves," she said quietly. "He said the only real tragedy was letting fear keep you from feeling fully alive." Aiyana's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "Your husband was a wise man. I think I would have liked him." "He would have liked you too," Elena said, and realized with surprise that it was true. Miguel had always judged people by their character rather than their circumstances. He believed in honor, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He would have understood why you risk everything for your people. And would he understand this? Aiyana asked, lifting their joined hands to press Elena's palm against his cheek. Would he understand how his wife has awakened something in me I thought was dead forever? Elena felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of his touch, the way her body responded to his nearness, as if she had been sleeping for years and was finally waking up. "I think he would want me to be happy," she whispered. "I think he would want me to live, not just survive." Aiyana stood slowly, drawing Elena up with him. They faced each other in the lamplight, both trembling with the weight of the choice before them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the world in silence and isolation. "Elena," Aiyana said, his voice rough with emotion, If we cross this line, there is no going back. Even when I leave, even if we never see each other again, we will be changed. I've been changed since the moment you knocked on my door, Elena replied, stepping closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The question is whether I'm brave enough to admit it. Aiyana cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent and gentle. You are the bravest woman I have ever known. You opened your door to 7 armed strangers in a storm. You risked your life to save mine. Then be brave with me, Elena whispered, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. Help me remember what it feels like to be alive. When their lips met, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the warmth of his mouth on hers, the strength of his arms surrounding her, and the startling realization that some kinds of love could bloom even in the most impossible circumstances. Dawn broke crisp and clear on the 3rd day, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. Elena woke in her own bed, but everything felt different. The quality of light through her window, the sound of voices in her kitchen, the way her own skin felt against the sheets. She had crossed a line the night before that she could never uncross, and despite the complications it brought, she felt more alive than she had in 3 years. She found Aiyana in the kitchen, preparing coffee with the easy competence of a man accustomed to caring for others. He looked up when she entered, and the soft smile that crossed his features made her heart skip. In the morning light, with his long hair loose around his shoulders and wearing Miguel's white shirt, he looked almost domesticated, until you saw his eyes, which held the alertness of a warrior who never fully relaxed. "Good morning," he said quietly, and the intimacy in his voice made Elena's cheeks warm with the memory of how the night had ended, with kisses that grew deeper and more passionate, until wisdom finally prevailed, and they had reluctantly parted, both knowing that some boundaries should not be crossed until they were certain of the consequences. "Good morning," Elena replied, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Elena felt that same electric jolt that had been building between them for days. From the main room came the sound of the other warriors beginning to stir. Nalnish was well enough to sit up and take solid food, and the others had recovered from their minor wounds and exposure. With the storm past and the skies clearing, Elena knew what nobody wanted to say aloud. Their time together was running out. "The weather has turned," Aiyana said, following her thoughts. "We must leave today before the cavalry picks up our trail again." Elena nodded, though the thought of them leaving felt like a physical ache in her chest. "Where will you go?" "South, toward Mexico. There are Apache bands there who live free beyond the reach of the American soldiers. It will be a hard journey, but it is our only chance for true safety." "And after, when you reach Mexico?" Aiyana set down his coffee cup and moved closer to her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. "After, I will remember a brave woman who showed kindness to strangers, who made me believe that love could find a way to bloom even in the darkest winter." The finality in his words hit Elena like a physical blow. "So this is goodbye then? Last night was the most precious gift I have received since my son was born," Aiyana interrupted, reaching up to touch her face gently. "Do not diminish it by calling it just anything. What we shared was real, Elena. It was beautiful, and it will live in my heart forever even if we can never be together." Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "It doesn't feel like enough. 3 days. How can 3 days change everything? Because some connections are not measured in time," Aiyana said softly. "Some souls recognize each other instantly, whether they have days or decades together." Before Elena could respond, the sound of horses approaching at speed carried across the still morning air. Both she and Aiyana froze, listening. The sound was unmistakable. Multiple riders, moving fast, still distant, but growing closer. "Cavalry," Aiyana said grimly, already moving toward the main room where his warriors were grabbing their weapons. Elena's mind raced. The approaching riders were still several minutes away, but not far enough for the Apache to escape unseen across the open, snow-covered ground. If they were caught here, Elena would be arrested as a collaborator, and the warriors would likely be killed or imprisoned. "The root cellar," Elena said suddenly, "under the kitchen floor. It's large enough for all of you, and they won't think to look there if I can convince them you've already gone." Aiyana stared at her. "You would lie to the cavalry, risk your life to protect us." "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. "I would." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Elena showed them the hidden entrance to the root cellar, a space Miguel had dug to store vegetables through the winter. large enough for 7 men if they didn't mind being cramped. The warriors moved with military efficiency, gathering their weapons and packs, erasing all signs of their presence. Aiyana was the last to descend into the hiding place. He paused at the entrance, looking up at Elena with an expression that combined gratitude, admiration, and something deeper. "If this goes wrong," he began. "It won't," Elena said firmly, though her heart was pounding. "Trust me." "I do trust you," Aiyana said. "Completely. But Elena, if something happens to me, I want you to know, these 3 days with you have been worth a lifetime of ordinary moments." Before Elena could respond, he disappeared into the cellar, and she quickly replaced the wooden boards that concealed the entrance, covering them with a rug and kitchen table. The sound of hoofbeats was much closer now. Elena forced herself to move calmly, checking her appearance in the mirror, banking the fire to remove evidence of cooking for 8 people instead of 1. When the knock came at her door, sharp, authoritative, military, she was ready. "Mrs. Martinez." The officer who stood on her porch was young, probably no older than Aiyana, with pale blue eyes and the kind of moustache that suggested he took himself very seriously. Behind him stood 6 soldiers, all armed, all scanning the area with suspicious eyes. "Lieutenant Williams, ma'am, from Fort Bowie. We're tracking a band of hostile Apache who may have passed through this area. Have you seen anything unusual in the past few days?" Elena met his eyes steadily. "Nothing unusual, Lieutenant, though with the storm I wouldn't have seen much of anything. I've been snowed in for 3 days. These Apache are dangerous, ma'am. 7 warriors, led by a renegade named Aiyana. They attacked a supply train last week and killed 2 soldiers." Elena felt anger flare in her chest at the lie, but kept her expression neutral. "I'm sorry for your losses, Lieutenant, but as I said, I've seen nothing." Lieutenant Williams stepped closer, and Elena caught the scent of leather and horse sweat, so different from Aiyana's clean, warm smell. "You wouldn't mind if we searched your property, would you, Mrs. Martinez? Just to be thorough." "Of course not," Elena said, stepping aside to let them enter. "Though I can't imagine why Apache would come here. Everyone knows I live alone." As the soldiers moved through her house, Elena forced herself to remain calm, even when they overturned furniture and examined every corner. Lieutenant Williams kept watching her face, looking for signs of deception. But Elena had learned to school her features during 3 years of dealing with various frontier troubles. "Your husband around, ma'am?" Williams asked casually. "My husband has been dead for 3 years, Lieutenant," Elena replied. "I run this ranch alone." Something shifted in Williams' expression, a calculation that made Elena's skin crawl. "Must get lonely out here, all by yourself. A woman like you shouldn't have to live without protection." Elena understood the implication and felt disgust rise in her throat, but she kept her voice level. "I managed just fine. Thank you." The search continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, Williams seemed satisfied that the house held no Apache warriors. As they prepared to leave, he turned back to Elena with that same calculating look. "We'll be patrolling this area regularly, Mrs. Martinez. If you see anything at all, you send word immediately. And if you ever need assistance with ranch work or anything else, don't hesitate to call on Fort Bowie. We take care of our loyal citizens." "I'll remember that," Elena said, closing the door firmly behind them. She waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely before moving the table and lifting the boards. 7 faces looked up at her from the cellar, grateful, admiring, and in Aiyana's case, filled with something that looked very much like love. "They're gone," Elena said softly, "but they'll be back. You need to leave now, while you still can." The warriors moved with swift efficiency, gathering their belongings while Elena kept watch at the window. The afternoon sun gleamed off the snow, creating a landscape of blinding white beauty that would make tracking both easier and harder. Easier because footprints would be visible for miles, harder because the glare could confuse pursuers about direction and distance. Aiyana approached Elena as his men prepared their horses in the barn. In the afternoon light, he looked every inch the Apache warrior he was. Proud, strong, dangerous. But Elena could see past that now to the man beneath, the one who had held her so tenderly, who had spoken of dreams and loss with equal honesty. "There is something I must tell you," he said quietly, his voice carrying an urgency that made Elena's heart clench with foreboding. "What is it?" "The lieutenant who came here, Williams. I know him. He was at the massacre of our winter camp, and he is not just hunting us for military reasons. He seeks revenge because during our escape, Nal Nish killed his brother." Elena felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "What does that mean?" It means he will not give up easily, and it means that if he ever suspects you helped us, he will come back, not as a soldier seeking information, but as a man seeking vengeance. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. She had not just risked her life for one night, she had potentially changed the entire course of her future. But looking at Aiyana's face, seeing the concern and guilt there, she felt no regret. "Then I'll have to be very careful," she said simply. "Elena, you do not understand." "I understand perfectly," Elena interrupted, stepping closer to him. "I understand that I made my choice with open eyes. I understand that some things are worth the risk. And I understand that if I had to do it again, I would make the same choice every time." Aiyana stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest with desperate intensity. "You magnificent, impossible woman," he whispered against her hair. "How did I find you? How did I fall in love with you in 3 days?" Elena's breath caught at his words. "Love, yes, love," Aiyana said, pulling back to look at her face. "I love your courage, your kindness, your stubborn refusal to be afraid when you should be terrified. I love the way you move through your world with quiet strength. I love that you saw past what I am supposed to be to who I actually am." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I love your honor, your gentleness with your wounded men, the way you carry responsibility without complaint. I love that you made me feel alive again when I thought that part of me was dead forever." They kissed then, desperately, passionately, pouring 3 days' worth of impossible love into one moment that had to last them whatever came next. "Come with us," Aiyana said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if he couldn't stop them. "Come to Mexico. Leave this place. Leave the danger Williams represents, and come with us." Elena's heart leaped at the possibility, but reality crashed down just as quickly. "I can't. This ranch, this life, it's all I have left of Miguel. I can't just abandon it. Even if staying means Williams comes back. Even if it means never seeing me again." Elena closed her eyes, feeling torn between 2 worlds, 2 lives, 2 kinds of love. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know how to choose." From the barn came a soft whistle, the signal that the horses were ready and time was running out. Aiyana cursed softly in Apache, then took Elena's face in his hands. "I will not pressure you to make this choice now," he said, "but I will tell you this. If you ever decide you want a different life, if you ever tire of being alone, find a way to get word to the Apache bands in the Sierra Madre Mountains. Ask for Aiyana of the Chiricahua. I will come for you, no matter how long it takes, no matter how far I have to travel. And if I choose to stay, then I will love you from a distance, and I will hope that someday the world changes enough that love like ours doesn't have to hide in shadows." They walked to the barn together, where the other warriors waited with their horses. Each man approached Elena in turn, offering thanks in broken English or gestures of respect. Nalnish, still weak but determined to travel, took her hand and spoke in Apache. Aiyana translated, "He says you are Shima, mother, protector. He says you saved not just his life, but his honor. Because a warrior who dies in a white woman's house instead of on the battlefield might not find his way to the spirit world. But a warrior who lives because a brave woman chose mercy, that warrior carries medicine, powerful medicine." Elena felt tears threaten again. "Tell him it was my honor to help." As the warriors mounted their horses, Elena noticed they had left something behind, a beautiful woven blanket draped over Miguel's favorite chair, and on her kitchen table, a small carving of a running horse that must have been made during the storm. "So you remember us," Aiyana explained, swinging onto his own horse. The animal was a magnificent paint stallion that seemed to reflect its rider's wild beauty. "And so we leave part of ourselves with you." Elena looked up at him, memorizing every detail, the way he sat his horse like he was born to it, the way the afternoon sun brought out the blue highlights in his black hair, the way his amber eyes held both sadness and hope. "I have something for you too," she said, pulling Miguel's silver compass from her pocket. "It belonged to my husband. He said it would always point toward home. Maybe it will help you find yours." Aiyana leaned down from his horse to accept the gift, their fingers lingering as he took it. "I think I already found my home," he said softly. "I just don't know if I can stay there." "Aiyana," Elena called as he began to turn his horse. "If the world does change, if there comes a time when love matters more than color or tradition, you'll know where to find me." He smiled then, the radiant expression that transformed his whole face. "Yes, I will." Elena watched them ride south across the snow-covered landscape, until they were just dark specks against the white expanse, then until they disappeared entirely behind a line of distant hills. The silence that settled over her ranch felt different now, not the hollow emptiness of the past 3 years, but a charged quiet full of possibility. That evening, as Elena sat by her fire with the Apache blanket around her shoulders, she heard the sound of approaching horses again. But this time she felt no fear. Lieutenant Williams and 2 soldiers appeared at her door, clearly hoping to catch some evidence of Apache presence. "Good evening, Mrs. Martinez," Williams said, his pale eyes scanning her property. "Thought we'd check back, see if you'd remembered anything about those Apache." "Nothing new to report, Lieutenant," Elena said calmly. "But I appreciate your concern." Williams stepped closer, and Elena caught that calculating look again. "You know, ma'am, a woman in your position might benefit from some regular protection. I could arrange for soldiers to check on you frequently, very frequently." Elena met his gaze steadily, thinking of Aiyana's warnings, thinking of the choice that lay before her. "That's very kind, Lieutenant, but I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." "Are you sure about that?" Williams pressed. "These are dangerous times for a woman alone." Elena smiled, thinking of 7 Apache warriors who had trusted her with their lives, of a man who had awakened her heart and offered her a chance at a completely different existence. "Yes, Lieutenant, I'm quite sure." After they left, Elena sat by her window looking south toward Mexico, toward mountains she had never seen, toward a love that had changed everything in 3 short days. In her hand, she held the small carved horse, turning it over and over as she considered possibilities she had never imagined. The world might not be ready for love that crossed such boundaries, but the world was changing, and Elena Martinez, who had learned that courage sometimes meant opening your door to strangers in a storm, was finally ready to change with it. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere to the south, an Apache warrior rode toward an uncertain future, carrying a silver compass that would always point him back to a small ranch where a brave woman had taught him that love could bloom even in the deepest winter. The story of the White Widow and the Apache warrior was far from over. It was perhaps just beginning.